recap and fallout. The dust from the revelations in Part 1 had not yet settled. Two families, once close-knit by the bonds of friendship, were now separated by betrayal, mistrust, and a web of lies. Adam and Kemi, and Andrew and Irene, had discovered that their children were not biologically theirs, and the truth of their affairs had unraveled their lives. The results of the DNA tests revealed the following truths. Rachel, raised by Adam and Kemi, was Andrew's biological daughter. Mavis, raised by Andrew and Irene, was Adam's biological daughter. Obina, thought to be Oladele and Kemi's son, was actually Andrew's biological child. The weight of these revelations was crushing, especially for the children, whose sense of identity had been shattered. Meanwhile, Irene's pregnancy and the uncertainty surrounding its paternity added an explosive element to the already fractured relationships. For the parents, guilt and regret became constant companions. Kemi was tormented by the realization that her affair with Andrew had resulted in a child. Every time she looked at Rachel, she saw her mistake staring back at her. She tried to make sense of how her actions had brought so much pain to her family. Kemi began to question whether she had been a good mother to Rachel, knowing now that Rachel had unknowingly borne the consequences of her choices. Adam, who had always prided himself on his sense of honor, was a shadow of his former self. The betrayal cut deeply, not only from Kemi but also from his best friend Andrew. Yet it was his bond with Rachel tore at his heart the most. Despite knowing she was not his biological child, he could not let go of the love he had for her. He struggled to reconcile his anger with the need to create stability for his children. Andrew was consumed by conflicting emotions. He felt a strange pull toward Rachel, his biological daughter, and an overwhelming guilt for disrupting her life. Obina's presence in Adam's home haunted him, and he regretted the years he had lost with his son. Still, his guilt over betraying his wife, Irene, threatened to suffocate him. Irene, now pregnant, was overwhelmed by uncertainty. She had no idea whether the child she carried was Andrew's or Adam's. The very thought filled her with dread, and she avoided looking Andrew in the eyes. Her love for Mavis remained steadfast, but the growing distance between her and her daughter hurt deeply. Kemi's journey to self-discovery. Kemi sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the reflection of herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was foreign, a stranger with the same face, but no longer the woman she once knew. The pain of betrayal, both inflicted and endured, had carved deep lines in her soul. It wasn't just the affair that tore her apart. It was the years of silence, the moments when she'd ignored the small signs, the moments she had dismissed her gut feelings, believing in a love that in the end wasn't truly hers. She reached for her phone, scrolling through messages that once filled her heart with joy, but now seemed like reminders of her naivete. Her mind kept returning to Rachel, her daughter, who had become distant and withdrawn. Kemi had been so consumed with her own pain that she failed to see how much her daughter had been hurting. Rachel's questions were growing sharper, her once carefree spirit now a quiet storm of confusion and sadness. Kemi's heart ached, knowing her actions had contributed to this turmoil. Sighing, Kemi looked out the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It was a new day, but she wasn't sure she knew how to walk into it. Therapy had helped her find some clarity, but healing would take time. She had promised herself that she would build a life that wasn't tethered to lies and deceit. Her future, she knew, would be one of rebuilding, not just her marriage, but her sense of self. She owed it to Rachel, to herself, to reclaim the woman she used to be before she became a casualty of her mistakes. Adam and Andrew's attempts at reconciliation. Adam, on the other hand, was buried in regret, pacing around his home late at night, his mind racing. He had no idea how to undo the damage he had caused. His wife, Kemi, was forgiving, but he could see the uncertainty in her eyes every time she looked at him. He had betrayed her in the worst possible way, and now she was trying to forgive, trying to trust him again. He could tell she wanted to. But how could she? How could anyone come back from the kind of betrayal he had caused? Each morning, he tried to act like everything was fine, but the truth was, nothing felt the same. The house seemed quieter. The love they had shared felt like a faint memory, overshadowed by the reality of their fractured relationship. He had done this. He had made a choice to step outside his marriage, and now he was paying the price for it. He found himself often staring at the space where Kemi once slept, wondering if he could ever make things right. He had promised himself that he would make amends, but with each passing day, the distance between them seemed to grow. Andrew, meanwhile, had started attending therapy with Irene. He thought that by addressing his own issues with control and guilt, he might somehow be able to heal his family. He had stopped seeing Irene, distancing himself in an attempt to salvage his marriage. But every time he saw Mavis, his daughter, he was reminded of the pain his actions had caused. She was quiet now, retreating into herself, no longer the lively, carefree child she used to be. He could see the questions in her eyes, the confusion, the hurt, but she never asked. Instead, she simply accepted the silence that now hung between them. Andrew hated himself for it. He regretted everything, from the moment he had betrayed his wife, to the lies, to the moments when he had convinced himself that he was justified in his actions. Irene's pregnancy now added a new layer of complication to an already fractured family. He couldn't help but wonder, had he done enough to make up for his mistakes? Could he ever be the man he used to be, or had that man been lost forever? The impact on the children. The impact on the children was undeniable. Kemi's daughter, Rachel, once a bubbly, talkative girl, had become withdrawn, her once bright smile replaced with a look of sadness. She had stopped asking questions about her father, stopped caring about the little things that used to excite her. Kemi couldn't help but feel guilty. Had she failed Rachel? Had her choices, her silence, created a divide between them that she wasn't sure could ever be bridged? She sat with Rachel one evening as the girl stared blankly at the TV, lost in thought. "Rachel," Kemi said softly, her voice trembling, "talk to me. What's going on in that mind of yours?" Rachel didn't look at her, but her voice was quiet. "I'm fine, Mama." But Kemi knew better. Rachel wasn't fine. She had become quieter, more reserved, and it broke Kemi's heart to see it. She had been so focused on her own pain that she hadn't seen the damage it was causing to her daughter. She regretted not being more present for Rachel, not noticing the signs that something was wrong. How could she have missed it? Andrew's daughter, Mavis, had also changed. She had once been full of life, always running to greet her father with a hug, always asking questions and sharing her thoughts. But now, she seemed distant, like she was carrying a heavy weight she couldn't quite explain. Andrew had tried to talk to her, but she would shrug him off, giving him half-hearted responses. She had stopped asking him about his day, stopped asking him to help with her schoolwork, and her laughter had all but disappeared. Andrew felt the sting of her indifference. He knew this was his fault, and the guilt weighed heavily on him. He couldn't remember the last time Mavis had genuinely smiled at him, and it was killing him. The truth was that their children had been hurt the most. They hadn't asked for this. They hadn't asked for their parents to make mistakes. They hadn't asked to be dragged into a world of lies and broken trust. And now, both Kemi and Andrew had to live with the consequences, the pregnancy mystery. As the months passed, the tension between the couples remained palpable. Kemi found herself questioning everything. Was she doing the right thing by staying with Adam? Could she ever truly forgive him for what he had done? And could she ever trust him again? One evening, as she sat at the kitchen table, the phone rang. It was Irene. Kemi had seen her name appear on the screen, and for a moment she hesitated, but she knew she had to answer. "Irene," Kemi said, her voice quiet. "Kemi," Irene replied, her tone flat. "I need to talk to you." Kemi's heart began to race. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant," Irene said, her words hanging in the air between them. Kemi's breath caught in her throat. But you don't know who the father is, do you?" she asked, her voice trembling. Irene didn't answer immediately. The silence between them felt deafening, a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. Kemi knew the truth, even before Irene admitted it. "I'm sorry," Irene finally whispered. And in that moment, Kemi realized that the past was never truly going to be behind them. There was always going to be something, another twist, another lie, another betrayal. But for the sake of their children, they had to try. They had to find a way forward. A shocking revelation. Irene's voice cracked as she continued. "Kemi, I don't know who the father is. It could be Andrew or Adam." Kemi clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles white as she absorbed the words. Her stomach churned, and a cold sweat ran down her back. The silence that followed felt eternal. How had they all come to this point? What had once been friendships, laughter, and shared memories had now turned into betrayal, suspicion, and heartbreak. "What are you going to do?" Kemi asked, her voice trembling but steady enough to mask the turmoil brewing within. "I don't know," Irene admitted. "I thought I could keep it hidden, but the truth is bound to come out eventually. I don't know how to tell Andrew. I don't know how to tell anyone." For a moment, Kemi felt a flicker of pity for Irene. Despite her anger and disgust, she could see that Irene was struggling. But pity quickly gave way to rage. Irene's actions had dragged them all into this mess again, and now the consequences were growing far more complex. "Irene," Kemi said after a long pause, her tone firm now, "this isn't just about you anymore. There are children involved. There are lives being shattered. You need to face the truth, no matter how ugly it is." Irene let out a shaky breath. I know I've made terrible mistakes. But Kemi, you have to believe me. I never wanted this. I never wanted any of this." The children's pain unveiled. While Kemi was on the phone with Irene, Rachel sat on the stairs, eavesdropping. She hadn't meant to listen, but when she heard her mother's voice rise in anger, she couldn't help herself. Now, as she pieced together fragments of the conversation, her young mind struggled to make sense of the chaos unfolding in her family. She didn't understand everything, but she knew enough to realize that her parents had secrets that were tearing them apart. Later that night, Rachel confronted her mother. "Mama," she said, standing in the doorway of Kemi's bedroom, "why are you always so sad?" Kemi froze. She had been sitting on the bed, lost in thought, but her daughter's voice jolted her back to reality. She looked up and saw Rachel's tear-filled eyes, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I'm not sad, my love," Kemi said weakly, trying to force a smile. "Yes, you are," Rachel insisted. "You and Papa are always fighting. You don't talk to each other like you used to. And now you're talking about things I don't understand. What's going on, Mama? Why does everything feel broken?" Kemi's heart broke as she pulled Rachel into her arms. "Oh, my sweet girl," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to feel this way. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault." "But why, Mama?" Rachel asked, her voice muffled against Kemi's shoulder. "Why can't we just be happy like we used to?" Kemi had no answer. All she could do was hold her daughter tightly, silently vowing to do better for her. At the same time, Mavis was having a similar conversation with her father. She had overheard him speaking on the phone earlier, his tone tense and strained. She had picked up on the tension in the house, the awkward silences, the way her parents avoided eye contact. It scared her. "Papa," Mavis said hesitantly, "are you mad at Mama?" Andrew looked up from his phone, startled. "What? No, of course not, Mavis. Then why don't you talk to each other anymore? Why does everything feel different?" Andrew sighed, running a hand over his face. "Mavis, sometimes grown-ups go through things that are hard to explain, but I promise you, your mother and I love you very much. Nothing will ever change that." Mavis frowned. "I just want us to be happy again, like we used to be." Andrew's chest tightened. He had no idea how to fix this, but he knew one thing for certain. He had to try. For Mavis's sake, he had to find a way to make things right. The parents' regret. As the days passed, both couples began to reflect deeply on their actions and the ripple effects they had caused. Kemi found herself crying more often, not just out of anger or betrayal, but out of deep regret. She regretted the lies, the deceit, the way she had allowed her pain to consume her. She regretted the distance that had grown between her and Rachel, the way her daughter now looked at her with questions in her eyes that she couldn't answer. Adam, too, was drowning in regret. He had thought he could compartmentalize his actions, keep his affairs separate from his family life. But now he saw how foolish that was. His choices had not only hurt Kemi, but also Rachel. He saw it in her eyes, in the way she avoided him, in the way she no longer ran to him for hugs or bedtime stories. He had betrayed not just his wife, but his daughter as well, and that was a weight he wasn't sure he could bear. Andrew and Irene were no better off. Andrew regretted every moment he had spent with Kemi, every lie he had told to Irene, every time he had justified his actions to himself. He had thought he was in control, but now he realized how much he had lost: his wife's trust, his daughter's innocence, and his own sense of self-respect. Irene, meanwhile, was consumed by guilt. She had thought she could escape the consequences of her actions, but the pregnancy had forced her to confront the truth. She regretted the pain she had caused Andrew, the betrayal she had inflicted on Kemi, and the confusion she had brought into the lives of their children. She felt like she had destroyed everything she touched, and now she didn't know how to put the pieces back together. Lessons learned. In the midst of their pain, each parent began to learn hard lessons about love, trust, and the consequences of their actions. Kemi realized that forgiveness wasn't just about the other person, it was about freeing herself from the weight of anger and resentment. Adam learned that love wasn't just about passion or desire. It was about commitment, honesty, and putting someone else's needs before his own. Andrew discovered that control wasn't the same as power, and that true strength came from admitting his mistakes and taking responsibility for them. And Irene learned that running from her problems only made them worse, and that facing the truth was the first step toward healing. But perhaps the most important lesson they all learned was that their actions didn't just affect them. They affected their children, their families, and everyone around them. And while they couldn't undo the past, they could choose to do better moving forward. The children bear the weight. The children's confusion soon turned into visible distress. Rachel, once a bubbly and cheerful girl, became withdrawn. She would sit in her room for hours, staring out of the window, her usual appetite for her favorite games and stories gone. At school, her teachers began to notice a decline in her performance. She would often lose focus, and when asked questions, she would merely shrug. Similarly, Mavis began to isolate herself from her friends. She avoided playground games and lunchtime chatter, choosing instead to sit alone, her small hands clutching the necklace her father had given her on her last birthday. The weight of the unspoken tension in her home became a burden she didn't know how to share. One evening, Rachel and Mavis found themselves at the same park where their families used to gather for picnics. Their parents had unknowingly brought them there in separate attempts to lighten their moods. Spotting each other across the field, the girls hesitated at first. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, they walked toward each other. "I don't know what's happening," Rachel confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "But my mama and papa, they're different now. It's like they don't love each other anymore." Mavis nodded solemnly. "It's the same with mine. I hear them arguing at night. They think I can't hear, but I do. It's scary." The two girls hugged tightly, finding solace in their shared confusion. It was a moment of pure innocence amidst the chaos, a reminder of what was at stake if their parents didn't make things right. The search for redemption. Adam, plagued by the sight of his daughter retreating into herself, decided to take the first step toward mending his family. One evening, after tucking Rachel into bed, he sat down with Kemi in the living room. "Kemi," he began, his voice heavy with emotion, "I've done things I'm not proud of. I've hurt you in ways I can never take back, but I want to fix this. For you, for Rachel, for us." Kemi looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Do you really think we can fix this, Adam? Do you think we can undo everything we've done to each other?" "I don't know," Adam admitted, "but I know we owe it to Rachel to try." Across town, Andrew was having a similar conversation with Irene. The news of her pregnancy had forced them to confront the reality of their situation. "Irene," Andrew said, his voice firm but gentle, "we need to find a way to move forward. This isn't just about us anymore. There's a child involved, another innocent life caught in the crossfire of our mistakes." Irene nodded, her hand instinctively resting on her stomach. "I know, Andrew. I've been thinking about that a lot. I want to make things right. I don't know how, but I want to try." The children's emotional turmoil. Rachel and Mavis were the most affected. At 9 years old, they were old enough to sense the gravity of the situation, but too young to fully process its implications. Rachel, the vivacious and inquisitive girl, overheard hushed conversations and noticed the tension in the house. She couldn't understand why her Uncle Andrew was suddenly more interested in her, offering kind words and small gifts. When she asked her mother, Kemi, why Uncle Andrew was acting so strangely, Kemi broke down in tears. Mavis, who had always been quiet and introspective, began to withdraw further. She felt lost between the parents who had raised her and the man who was supposed to be her biological father. Her bond with Andrew became strained as she questioned whether his affection for her was genuine or merely guilt. Obinna, at 5, seemed blissfully unaware at first, but the tense conversations and emotional outbursts in the household made him anxious. He clung to Kemi, the only mother he had ever known, and sought comfort from Adam, whom he still called Papa. A hard truth for the children. In their quest for redemption, the parents decided it was time to be honest with their children, at least as much as they could understand at their young ages. Kemi and Adam sat Rachel down one Sunday afternoon, their faces somber but determined. "Rachel," Kemi began, taking her daughter's hands in hers, "there's something we need to talk about. Sometimes adults make mistakes, big mistakes, and those mistakes can hurt the people we love. Your papa and I have made some of those mistakes, and we're very sorry." Rachel looked at them, her young face filled with both curiosity and fear. "Are you going to leave each other?" she asked hesitantly. Adam's heart clenched. "No, sweetheart. We're going to work really hard to make things better. We love you so much, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure you feel safe and happy." Meanwhile, Andrew and Irene were having a similar conversation with Mavis. "Mavis," Andrew said, his voice thick with emotion, "your mama and I haven't been the best parents lately. We've let our problems affect you, and for that, we're so sorry. But we're going to do everything we can to make things better." Mavis, her small voice trembling, asked, "Promise?" Irene placed a hand on her daughter's cheek. "We promise, Mavis. Things are going to change. A lesson in identity." The parents decided to seek professional help, understanding that their children needed guidance to process the situation. They attended family therapy sessions, where the truth was explained in a way the children could understand. The therapist asked each child how they felt about the revelations. "I don't understand why it matters," Rachel said, her voice trembling. "I love my mommy and daddy. I don't want things to change." Mavis nodded in agreement. "I don't care whose blood I have. I just want my family back." Their words struck a chord with the adults, who realized that their children valued love and stability over biology. The parents resolved to put their differences aside and focus on rebuilding trust for the sake of their children. The pregnancy mystery. Irene's pregnancy loomed like a storm cloud over the families. At every doctor's appointment, she wondered if she should find out the paternity. Andrew, sensing her anxiety, tried to be supportive, but his own doubts made it difficult. One evening, Irene sat down with Kemi. Despite their fractured friendship, they had begun to rebuild a tentative bond, united by the need to protect their children. "What will you do if the baby isn't Andrew's?" Kemi asked gently. Irene sighed. "I don't know. I want to believe we can move forward, but the truth has already broken us in so many ways." Kemi nodded. "Maybe it's not about who the father is. Maybe it's about giving this child a chance to grow up in a family that loves them no matter what." Lessons and regret. As the parents reflected on their actions, they began to understand the depth of their mistakes. Kemi wrote a letter to Rachel, apologizing for the pain she had caused. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me," she wrote. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you feel loved and cherished." Adam, too, softened. He chose to focus on being the best father he could be to Rachel, recognizing that love was more important than biology. Andrew and Irene, still struggling to repair their relationship, found solace in small acts of kindness toward one another. They realized that forgiveness would take time, but they were willing to try for the sake of their children. The road ahead. While the families could not undo the past, they began to take steps toward healing. The children's resilience inspired the adults to let go of their anger and focus on creating a brighter future. Still, the uncertainty of Irene's pregnancy remained a source of tension, leaving the door open for new revelations and challenges. The ripple effects of choices. The two families were trying to move forward, but the ripple effects of their choices lingered. The children's lives were forever altered, and even as the adults worked to rebuild their fractured relationships, the scars of betrayal and confusion ran deep. confronting the truth with the children. One evening, Adam sat down with Rachel after noticing her growing silence. The 9-year-old had always been thoughtful and shy, but now her reserved nature felt like a shield. "Rachel," Adam began gently, "I know this has been a very confusing time for you." Rachel looked at him with wide eyes, her hands clutching a worn teddy bear. "Why did everything have to change, Papa?" Adam's heart ached. "Sometimes adults make mistakes, big ones. But no matter what, you are my daughter, and I love you. That will never change." Rachel hesitated before asking the question that had been haunting her. "Do you love me the same, even though I'm not your real daughter?" Adam pulled her into his arms. "You are my daughter in every way that matters. Nothing can take that away." Meanwhile, Andrew was having a similar conversation with Mavis. The little girl had always been bold and outspoken, but lately she had been asking questions that were difficult to answer. "Uncle Andrew," she said one day, "why do you always look sad when you see me?" Andrew was taken aback. "I'm not sad," he said, though the words felt hollow. "I just think about how much I care for you and want the best for you." "Do you wish I was your daughter?" she asked bluntly. Andrew paused, unsure of how much to reveal. "You are special to me, no matter what, that's what's important." The children's bond. Despite the adults' efforts to create stability, Rachel, Mavis, and Obina began to seek solace in one another. The 3 children, all connected by the tangled web of their parents' choices, formed an unspoken bond. One day, while playing outside, Obina made a surprising declaration. "Maybe we're all just one big family now," he said cheerfully. Mavis frowned. "Families aren't supposed to have so many secrets," she replied. Rachel crossed her arms. "Secrets make everything worse. Maybe if everyone told the truth, things wouldn't be so messy." Their conversation was interrupted by Kemi, who had overheard. Her chest tightened as she realized the weight her children were carrying. She resolved to be more honest with them, even if it was painful. The pregnancy revelation. Irene's pregnancy became the elephant in the room. As her due date approached, the pressure to determine the baby's paternity grew unbearable. One evening, Andrew and Irene had a heated argument about whether to take a prenatal paternity test. "I just want to know the truth," Andrew exclaimed. "How can we move forward if we don't know?" Irene's voice trembled. "And what if the truth destroys what little we have left? This baby deserves to come into the world without the weight of all our mistakes." Eventually, they agreed to wait until the baby was born to determine the paternity. The impact on friendships. The once close bond between Kemi and Irene had been reduced to polite interactions. They still shared occasional conversations, mostly about the children, but the warmth and trust were gone. One day, Kemi decided to confront Irene about their strained relationship. "Irene, do you think we can ever go back to being friends?" she asked hesitantly. Irene shook her head. "I don't know, Kemi. We've hurt each other too much. Maybe it's better if we focus on being good mothers for now." Kemi nodded, though her heart ached. The loss of her closest friend felt like another price she had to pay for her mistakes. Lessons in forgiveness. Over time, the parents began to reflect on the lessons they had learned. Andrew started volunteering at a local community center, mentoring young boys. He hoped to channel his regrets into something positive, teaching others about the importance of honesty and accountability. Adam, once rigid and unyielding, softened in his approach to life. He began spending more time with his children, prioritizing their happiness over his own pride. Kemi took up writing, documenting her journey of regret and redemption. She hoped her story might help others avoid making the same mistakes. Irene, still grappling with her pregnancy, turned to her faith for guidance. She prayed for strength to face whatever lay ahead and to create a loving home for her children, no matter what the future held. As the families began their journey toward healing, they discovered that forgiveness was a long and painful process. It wasn't easy for Kemi to let go of her anger, or for Adam to confront his guilt. It wasn't easy for Andrew and Irene to rebuild the trust they had shattered. But they learned that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing to move forward despite it. They also learned that their actions had consequences far beyond themselves. They saw the pain they had caused their children, the way their choices had robbed them of their innocence, and they vowed never to let their selfishness hurt their families again. The birth of hope. When the baby was finally born, a beautiful baby girl, both families gathered at the hospital. The room was filled with tension, but also a glimmer of hope. Andrew held the baby with trembling hands. "No matter what, she's ours," he said, looking at Irene. Kemi, standing in the corner, felt tears welling up. She couldn't help but wonder if this new life could be the bridge that brought healing to their broken families. Adam, though still wary, stepped forward. "Let's raise her with love," he said firmly. "Let's do better this time." Irene looked at all of them and nodded. She deserves nothing less. The road to healing. The journey was far from over. There were still wounds to heal and relationships to mend, but for the first time in a long while, the families felt a sense of hope. Rachel, Mavis, and Obinna watched the adults with curiosity, sensing that something important was happening. "Do you think things will get better now?" Rachel asked. Mavis shrugged. "Maybe. At least we're all trying." And for the first time, trying felt like enough. The path toward redemption. The months following the birth of Irene's baby, whom she named Adaora, were filled with cautious steps toward healing. The families remained intertwined, bound by shared mistakes, regrets, and the innocent lives that depended on them. Children's innocent observations. One quiet afternoon, Rachel and Mavis sat under the mango tree in Kemi's backyard, watching Obinna attempt to climb the tree. "Rachel," Mavis began hesitantly, "do you think we'll all live together one day? Like one big family?" Rachel frowned, her small forehead wrinkling in thought. "Maybe, but grown-ups make things so complicated." Obinna, now dangling precariously from a low branch, chimed in. "Mama said we're all family anyway. She said love is what matters most." The girls exchanged a glance. Love to them seemed like a confusing and messy thing. Later that evening, Rachel repeated Obinna's words to Adam. "Papa, is love really the most important thing?" Adam hesitated before kneeling to her level. "Love is important, Rachel, but love without trust, respect, and honesty can sometimes hurt more than it helps. That's what we're all trying to learn now." Kemi's quiet strength. Kemi found herself stepping into the role of mediator and emotional anchor for everyone. She knew her decisions had contributed to the chaos, but she was determined to make amends, especially for the children. One evening, she invited Irene over for tea, a tentative olive branch. "Irene," Kemi began, her voice steady, "I know we can't erase what happened, but I miss what we had. You were my sister, my confidant. I want us to find a way back to that, even if it takes time." Irene's eyes glistened with tears. "I miss it too, Kemi, but the hurt, it's still so fresh." "It doesn't have to happen all at once," Kemi said softly. "But for the sake of the kids, for the sake of our own hearts, let's at least try." That evening marked the first step toward rebuilding their friendship. The weight of paternity. Though they tried to focus on the future, the lingering question of Adaora's paternity loomed over them. One evening, Andrew approached Adam with a proposition. "We can't keep avoiding this, Adam," Andrew said. "It's not just about us anymore. We need to know for her sake." Adam nodded reluctantly. "But if the results complicate things even further, how do we protect her from the fallout?" "We'll have to face it together," Andrew replied. The paternity test was conducted quietly, with no fanfare or dramatics. When the results arrived, they confirmed what Adam had feared but also suspected deep down. Adaora was his biological daughter. Breaking the news. Telling Kemi was one of the hardest moments of Adam's life. Sitting across from her in their living room, he handed her the envelope. She stared at it for a long time before opening it, her hands trembling. When she read the results, her face crumpled. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew it from the way you looked at her." "Kemi, I didn't mean for any of this to happen," Andrew said, his voice breaking. "But it did," she replied, her voice rising, "and now we have to live with it." Despite her anger and heartbreak, Kemi resolved to ensure that Adaora was loved and accepted. She knew the child was blameless in all of this. Irene's struggles for Irene, the confirmation brought a mix of relief and guilt. While she was glad to know the truth, she worried about how it would affect Adaora's future. One evening, she confided in her pastor, seeking guidance. "I want to do what's best for her," Irene said. "But how do I protect her from the consequences of my actions?" The pastor looked at her kindly. "You can't change the past, Irene, but you can show her through your actions that love and redemption are possible. Be the example she needs. The children's resilience when. As the adults navigated the complexities of their situation, the children displayed a resilience that surprised them all. Rachel and Mavis grew closer, often referring to each other as sisters. One day, during a family gathering, Rachel announced proudly, "We're like twins, even if we don't look the same." The adults exchanged bittersweet smiles. The innocence of childhood had a way of cutting through the tangled mess of their lives, reminding them of what truly mattered. A lesson in regret. Adam, reflecting on the events of the past year, began journaling his thoughts. "I've learned that betrayal doesn't just hurt the person it's aimed at. It ripples outward, affecting everyone around you," he wrote. "But I've also learned that forgiveness, though difficult, is the only way to move forward. For the sake of our children, for the sake of ourselves, we must forgive, not just each other, but ourselves too." Andrew, too, found himself grappling with regret. He began attending counseling sessions, hoping to become a better husband and father. "I don't want my mistakes to define me," he told his counselor. "I want to be someone my children can look up to." Moving forward. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time the two families felt a sense of unity. They made a pact to raise their children with love and honesty, vowing to break the cycle of secrets and lies. As they gathered for a joint family picnic one sunny afternoon, the sound of children's laughter filled the air. Watching Rachel, Mavis, and Obinna play together, the adults felt a glimmer of hope. "Maybe this is what redemption looks like," Kemi said quietly. "Maybe," Irene replied, "but it's up to us to make it last." The months turned into years, and the tangled web of betrayal gave way to a fragile but genuine effort to rebuild trust and harmony. Both families found solace in therapy, spirituality, and open communication. Though the scars of the past remained, they were determined to create a healthier foundation for the future. The path to redemption. Adam and Kemi found strength in renewing their vows in a quiet ceremony, pledging honesty and commitment to one another. Andrew and Irene followed suit, making a conscious decision to put their marriage first and learn from their mistakes. As time passed, both couples were blessed with new children, one for each couple, born out of genuine love and reconciliation. Kemi gave birth to a daughter named Temi, while Irene welcomed a son named Chijioke. These new lives symbolized fresh beginnings, a testament to the healing that had taken place. The focus shifted to raising their children with wisdom, love, and lessons learned from their past missteps. Rachel and Mavis's journey. As Rachel and Mavis grew older, their bond deepened, but they couldn't ignore the shadows of their family history. When Rachel turned 18, she sat down with Kemi for a long overdue conversation. "Mama, why did everything happen the way it did?" "I've always wondered." Kemi sighed, the weight of her past decisions evident in her expression. "Rachel, we were selfish and foolish, thinking only of ourselves and not of the pain it would cause others. But from that pain, we've learned what it means to truly love and forgive. I hope you'll learn from our mistakes." Mavis had a similar talk with Irene, who shared her regret with honesty. "I won't excuse my actions, Mavis, but I want you to know that you are my greatest blessing, and I will spend the rest of my life showing you the importance of doing what's right, even when it's hard." The children's perspective. Rachel and Mavis's experiences shaped their outlook on life. Though they initially felt anger and confusion about their parents' choices, they also saw the resilience and effort it took to mend broken relationships. By the time they reached adulthood, both young women carried these lessons into their own lives. Rachel, do you think you'll ever trust someone completely? Mavis asked one evening as they sat under the same mango tree from their childhood. "I think I will," Rachel replied thoughtfully, "but I'll also make sure I'm worthy of that trust. What about you?" Mavis smiled faintly. "I'll choose honesty, no matter how hard it is. That's one thing I've learned from all this." As the families found stability, the story of Rachel and Mavis transitioned from being about their parents' past to their own futures. Part 3 will explore their paths into adulthood, how they navigate relationships, careers, and their intertwined identities as the daughters of two families with a shared history. Themes of redemption, forgiveness, and growth will continue to anchor the narrative. the focus will shift to how the young women forge their own identities while carrying the lessons of their parents' mistakes. If this story touched your heart and left you eager for more, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for more captivating tales like this, subscribe to African Tales by Kwakuandakua. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story that inspires, entertains, and connects us to our rich heritage.